A 5-year-old's question shattered my entire belief system. I know this sounds impossible to believe. How could a child who couldn't even read yet destroy what I'd built over 40 years of religious study? How could one innocent question collapse beliefs I'd spent my entire life defending? I was a doctor of theology, a professor of religious studies at a prestigious university, author of 23 books on Buddhist philosophy. I'd spent 4 decades researching, debating, and teaching truths I believed were absolute. I had all the answers. I could resolve any philosophical contradiction, explain any spiritual paradox, defend any complex doctrine. Students revered me. Colleagues admired me. I was invited to lecture worldwide on certainty in an age of doubt. But a 5-year-old girl named Lucy, with curious eyes and a pure heart, asked one question I couldn't answer. And in that painful silence, my entire worldview began to crumble. What was the question? "Teacher, if everyone says they're right, who's really right?" Sounds simple, doesn't it? But the story of how that question exposed the fraud in my heart and how it forced me to face the truth I'd been avoiding my entire life, that's what will change how you look at belief. Let me take you back to how I became an expert on belief. At 20, I entered academia with the passion of a truth seeker. I didn't just want to understand Buddhism, I wanted to prove it was the only path to enlightenment. I spent my first 10 years studying scriptures, memorizing every verse, analyzing every word. I learned Sanskrit, Pali, and ancient Chinese to read original texts. I debated Christian, Muslim, Hindu scholars, always winning with sharp logic and vast knowledge. The next 10 years, I built a reputation as a defender of the faith. I wrote books proving Buddhism superior to all other religions. I taught courses with titles like Why Buddhism is the Only Way and Science Proves the Dharma. Students flocked to hear me prove their beliefs had scientific foundation. 20 years in, I became a faith warrior, someone who could defend Buddhism against any attack, refute any argument against it, prove its superiority over any belief system. I appeared on televised debates, wrote controversial articles, lectured at international conferences. People called me the Sword of Dharma, the defender of truth. But deep inside, something was rotting. The more I tried to prove Buddhism right, the more dogmatic I became. The more I defended my beliefs, the more I attacked others. The more I proclaimed compassion, the more rigid I became with dissenters. I began seeing non-Buddhists as deluded, other religious people as frauds, skeptics as enemies. My world became a battle between us and them, between light and darkness, between truth and error. 40 years in, I realized the horrible truth. I was no longer a seeker of truth. I'd turned the Dharma from a path of liberation into a weapon of attack, from a source of compassion into a reason for hatred, from the light of wisdom into a tool of ego. The turning point came when I was invited to speak at an elementary school about world religions. I'd prepared a brilliant presentation on why Buddhism was the best religion. armed with scientific evidence and irrefutable logic. But when I walked into the classroom and saw 30 pairs of curious young eyes, something in me paused. These weren't colleagues to be convinced or enemies to be defeated. These were just children wanting to understand the world. I began my talk more gently, explaining different religions and how each claimed to have the truth. But then Lucy, a 5-year-old with curly hair and bright eyes, raised her hand. "Teacher, if everyone says they're right, who's really right?"
The room fell silent. 30 children looked at me, awaiting an answer. And for the first time in 40 years, I had no answer. I stood there, mouth agape, realizing this simple question had touched the center of everything I'd spent my life avoiding. If every religion claims to be right, and each has sincere believers, convincing evidence and experiences that prove their truth, how could I be certain I was right and they were wrong? I need to think about that, I stammered, feeling like the building of my certainty was beginning to shake. But Lucy wasn't done. With the innocent curiosity of childhood, she continued, "And, teacher, if you were born somewhere else, would you believe something different?" That question was an arrow shot straight into the heart of my fraud. Because I knew the answer was yes. If I'd been born in Saudi Arabia, I might be a Muslim scholar, certain about the Quran. If I'd been born in Vatican City, I might be a Catholic priest defending the Bible. If I'd been born in Varanasi, I might be a Hindu pundit teaching the Vedas. My certainty about Buddhism wasn't based on objective truth-seeking. It was based on the geographical and cultural accident of birth. "Lucy," I whispered, my voice trembling, "you've asked the question adults spend their lives avoiding." That night, I lay awake confronting the truth I'd buried for 4 decades. I didn't know. I really didn't know if Buddhism was right. I just believed it was. And the difference between knowing and believing, the difference a 5-year-old had revealed, would change everything. The months that followed were the most difficult of my life. I had to face rebuilding my entire identity. I couldn't continue pretending to have certainty I didn't possess. I couldn't keep selling absolute answers to questions I now realized were mysteries. I began teaching differently. Instead of claiming Buddhism was the only way, I shared it as one path among many. Instead of attacking other religions, I explored their commonalities. Instead of providing certain answers, I admitted mystery. Students were initially confused. They came to hear me prove their beliefs, not to hear me confess doubts. But gradually, something magical happened. My classes became more alive. Instead of dutiful believers nodding at everything I said, I had real seekers asking real questions. Instead of debates about who was right or wrong, we had dialogues about meaning and mystery. Instead of rigid certainty, we had living humility. I wrote a new book, A Child's Questions: Why Not Knowing May Be the Highest Form of Wisdom. it became a bestseller, not because it provided answers, but because it asked better questions. Readers wrote saying they felt liberated from needing to be certain about everything. They began exploring their beliefs with curiosity instead of defensiveness. Lucy, the little girl who changed my life, is now 8 years old. I've met with her and her family several times. She doesn't know her question revolutionized a professor's life. To her, it was just natural curiosity. But that's exactly what made it so powerful. Innocence, uncorrupted by the need to be right. Today, 3 years after that encounter, I teach with a humility I never possessed before. I share the Dharma not as the only truth, but as one precious gem in humanity's treasury of wisdom. I encourage students to question everything, including what I teach, because I've learned that a child's question can be more powerful than an expert's answer, that curiosity can be deeper than certainty, that I don't know may be the highest form of wisdom. Subscribe if you've ever held beliefs you were afraid to question. Comment, "Don't know," if you're ready to trade certainty for curiosity.